Hi, everybody. Today I want to talk to you about functions. Uh, a function is a series of instructions inside of your program that you can run repeatedly without having to retype those instructions. You can think of them as a mini program inside of your program. Functions are useful tools for a couple of different reasons. First, as I just mentioned, you can rerun a function over and over again without repeatedly retyping the instructions. Let's say you've got like 40 lines of code and you need to run them 4 different times inside of your program. That would be, if you were just to run them normally 4 different times, that would be 160 lines of code if you didn't use a function. But if you do use a function, you write the 40 lines of code once, and then you use an additional 4 lines to run the function. That's it. So you way cut down on code. Another advantage is that if you make a mistake, functions are easier to debug and to fix. So for instance, like the example I just mentioned, if you use a function, you only have to fix the mistake in one place in your 40 lines of code inside of your function. Whereas if you do the 160 lines of code, running that code 4 different times in 4 different places, you have to, when you make a mistake, you have to go and fix it in each place, which can be kind of a pain in the butt, really. So it's just a lot easier to maintain your code if it's all in one place and then called repeatedly. So the other nice thing about having a function is that you also you have your program uh, split up into kind of different sections, right? So you have the section that checks to see if the year is a leap year, and that's kind of a mini program. And then you have another section that calculates the doomsday for the year, and that's another mini program, and so on and so on. So like, if you're not calculating the leap year properly, then you go to the leap year function and you fix that, and it's nicely set up so it says leap year at the beginning of the function, so you know exactly what it is. You go right there. It's a lot easier to maintain in that sense too. So let's talk about how a function works, and that's what this graphic here is all about. What a function does is it's really quite simple. It's kind of like, as I said, a mini program. And what it does is it takes some input, like the number 5, say, or some string or something like that. It runs these little lines of code, whatever code you've got, and it spits out an output. So let's think of an example would be, let's say I wrote a function, a little mini program, that whose job it was to take a word and spit out the last letter of that word. So the input in one case would be dog. If I type in the word dog, the input would be dog, and the output would be G, right? The last letter of the word dog. If the input was chalk, it does its processing, it spits out K. The input is slate, does its processing, spits out the letter E, and so on and so forth. So your input comes in, it gets processed somehow through a little bit of magic, and it spits something back out to your full program. I'm going to walk you step by step through writing and calling a function in order to help you further understand how this works. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to write a leap year calculating function, which we talked about before. Now, most of you probably are to the point where you're at least thinking about doing the doomsday, what day is this date on problem. So probably you're familiar with this, and if not, then you're going to get a little bit of a leg up on calculating a leap year. So what you see here is kind of the normal way, or the way that you first learned how to calculate the leap year. You see here I've got year equals input, right, an integer input, and I have my series of if statements. If the year mod 400 is 0, then I say leap year equals true. Elif leap year mod 100 equals 0, leap year equals false. Elif year mod 4 equals 0, leap year equals true. Else leap year equals false, right? And then what I'm doing here is I say if leap year. Basically what that means is if leap year is true. Print year is a leap year, else print year is not a leap year. So I'm running it through these ifs and elifs and elses. And if leap year is true, so if year mod 400 equals 0 or year mod 400 equals 0 while year mod 100 does not equal 0, then it's going to print as that's a leap year. So let's run it just so that you can see. 1992 is a leap year, and if I run it on 1993, hopefully it says it's not a leap year. Yeah, not a leap year. So there you go. So this is kind of one way to do it. And you, for your doomsday code, you would drop that right in the middle of your code, and it would work just fine. What I want to do is I want to show you how to call that as a function. What I do, a lot of this is going to be the same way. It's going to look exactly the same, so I can actually copy this part right here. So the rules are still the same, right? Like just because we're doing it as a function doesn't mean that you know, the way that you calculate it a leap year is going to be any different. So I'm going to save it as leap year.py. All right, but I need to do something in order to make sure that it's recognized as a function. The first thing you do when you want to call a function or when you want to make a function is you have to say that you're going to define it. So you type def, that basically stands for define. And I'm going to call it is leap year. And I've got my colon here. Now, the one thing that you need to do in here other than defining the name, define is leap year, you've got these parentheses here, and you need to say what sort of input you're receiving. Remember, as I said, your function has input and output. So my input is going to be year. So it comes to me, and whatever text it receives, whatever input it receives, we're going to call it year. I could call it the year or anything else. It doesn't really matter. But later on, I'm going to show you that some part of my code is going to pass me a number. And we're going to call that number the year in this case. Okay? So I'm going to put 3 little quotes here and here. And that's going to allow me to type a definition of what this function does. Determines if the given year is a leap year, right? So this is, all this does is it's like a comment, you know, it tells me what this program does. The nice thing about the triple quote marks at the top and at the bottom is it'll allow me to type multiple lines. I'm just going to show you. It'll allow me to type multiple lines without having to put a little hashtag at the beginning of every line. But for this one, I am only going to do 1 line because that's really not very complicated, right? So I have this define is leap year and then the year, where I say this is what my input is called. So because I called this the year, I have to type the year for all of these, because basically it's saying if the year, and it needs to know what this number is, right? So you can see that Notepad++ highlights this. So here I define what the number is called. It's called the year, and I say if the year, blah, 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 blah. Okay, now the next thing I need to do is I need to make one more change. Because we're inside of this function, I'm not going to say leap year equals. I am going to just tell it to return. What return means is basically like send the output back to the program, to the main program. So remember, this is a little mini program inside of my main program. So I need to tell it, okay, I've received my input, I processed it, and now I'm going to return my output back to the program. So it runs through this list and it returns true to the program if this is true, it returns false to the program if this is false, etc., etc. So now that I've defined my function at the top, now I can actually start my regular program. Now, if you have multiple functions, and most of your programs will have more than one function, then you should define all of your functions at the top, because your functions can't actually be run until they're defined. So you define all your functions first, and then the rest of your program that actually calls the function to run is at the bottom. So after that, I'm going to have my year equals int input blah blah blah. This is the beginning of the regular part of the program. Oops. And then I'm going to say leap year equals is leap year year. Now you'll notice that I didn't write the year down here, but that's because I'm not, these things, you can kind of consider these kind of separate. So we have is, oops, I forgot my underscore. I have is leap year year. And what this is this is saying send this value to the is leap year function. This is going to be my input. And what that is this variable here, year. I'm saying send year, whatever the user types in, to the function. And then inside the function I say, okay, that input I received, for my purposes I'm calling it the year. This name and this name do not have to match. In fact, sometimes it can be a little bit easier if you don't have them match, because maybe it'll create a little less confusion if you call them, the variables, different things. If it's easier for you, like I can call this year and have all of these say year, and it'll work as well. But sometimes it's easier to kind of keep your variables separate. So anyway, I'm saying the variable leap year equals the output of is leap year year. So basically whatever it returns is what leap year equals. And then I say if leap year print year is a leap year, else print year is not a leap year. So I'm going to save it and run it, and let's see if I made any mistakes. Chances are good, I probably made one. Expected an indent, huh? Right, because I have a colon here, I need to indent all this code. Right? Every time there's a colon, you have to indent. So, oops, I'm indenting all that stuff. So inside a function, you got to indent the code. So let's run it again. Oh no, expected an indented block. What? Oh, right, because this needs to be indented as well. Silly, yes, that's the way it is. So let's get rid of this and run it again. Will it work? Yes, 1992 is a leap year. 1994 is not a leap year. Perfect. So just to show you what I mean, I can change this to year. Oops. There we go. And I can change all these to year. And run it, save it, and run it. And it should work the same way. Yep. So just remember that here is where we send the input, where we define what input we're sending to the function. Here is where we name that input for the purposes of the function. So if I can call this Mandel, and what happens is the year, like when I type 1994 here, I say send 1994 to as leap year. And then I say, okay, this 1994 that I received, it's going to be called Mandel. It can be called anything. It doesn't have to have anything to do with the year, but usually you want to name it something that makes sense, right? So run in Python and 1994 is not a leap year. See, you can even have multiple functions, multiple inputs. So if I had, well, for our purposes in this program, we only have one function, one input that we need to process. But let's say I had other input equals 2000. I don't know. Then you could say year and other input. And then over here, you have to tell this function that our two inputs are going to be called, Mandel and something else. And then inside of the function, you have to say what you're going to do with something else. So there will be times where you'll want to take multiple inputs and then process them and spit out your output. Like for instance, if you were to write a function that calculated the area of a triangle, you might want to have pass base and height to your function, and then here you'd have to say, so you would have base, comma, height, and then here you would say, okay, I'm processing base and height. You can call them whatever you want, remember? And then you would have, the formula for base and height, and you would calculate that. But in this case, we only need one input, and we have one output, so easy peasy, right? So that is a short version on a short video, or semi-short video, on how to calculate or how to use a function. If you have any questions, and I'm sure you may, I want you to go to the Inventing with Python website, and Invent with Python. And in Chapter 6, there's a whole section at the beginning about functions and how they work. I recommend that you read that and maybe even work through the example to kind of give yourself an idea of exactly how they work. I should mention that functions don't always have to have an input. They can run a program. You just call it by typing the name of the function, display intro, and then in your parentheses, it's just empty. And then here, you don't have an input, so you don't have to name it anything. You just say display intro with the two parentheses and then what it does, right? And then you say to print and call it, and it should work. Anyway, read through here if you have any questions about how this works, and then try maybe adding a function to a program that you've already created to practice it. I'll be back on Monday to help you with this. I know it's a little complicated, but hopefully it makes sense. Thanks, guys.